When the security footage from the Inglewood Recreation Center was reviewed the morning after the incident, the supervisor expected to find evidence of negligence. What he found instead was something he had never seen before and something he would spend years trying to explain to anyone who asked. Marcus Webb, a 43-year-old overnight security guard, had not only let an unauthorized visitor into the facility after midnight, he had stayed with him for 3 hours. Rebounder after rebounder in an empty gymnasium while the rest of the city slept. The visitor was Bryant, and Marcus had no idea that opening that side door on a cold January night would cost him his job by morning and change the entire course of his life by the following evening. The question was never whether Marcus had broken protocol. The question was what kind of man breaks a rule and why, and what happens when the person he broke it for finds out what it cost him. Nobody, not Marcus, not his daughter, not even Kobe himself, could have predicted what the next 24 hours would set in motion. The recreation center on Century Boulevard sat between a check cashing place and a laundromat in a neighborhood where the street lights went out more often than they stayed on. Marcus had worked the overnight shift there for 7 years. 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. 5 nights a week. He knew every corner of the building. Every creak in the floor, every shadow. The exit signs threw against the walls at 2 in the morning. He knew which vending machine stuck on the third button and which bathroom faucet never fully shut off. He knew the building the way people know the places they spend their loneliest hours, which is to say completely and without romance. His daughter Brianna was 11 that January and obsessed with basketball the way only children can be obsessed with things completely and without self-consciousness. She had her father's old sneakers taped above her bed and a poster on her wall of a player mid-flight that she had cut from a magazine and laminated herself at the school library. Marcus coached her Saturday morning league and spent his lunch breaks drawing up plays in a notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. He was not a man who had been given much, but he was meticulous about what he had. It was 12:47 in the morning when he heard the knock on the side door. This was not unusual. The recreation center had a few authorized late users, coaches with early morning access, researchers from the community college who used the weight room before dawn. Marcus had a list and he knew everyone on it. The knock was 2 short and 1 long, which was the pattern authorized users were given. So he crossed the gym floor and opened the door. The man standing outside was tall and wearing a gray hoodie pulled low, a black baseball cap and dark sweatpants. He had his hands in his pockets and his breath was visible in the cold air. He looked like someone who had been walking for a while. "I know I'm not on your list," the man said. Marcus looked at him carefully. The voice was doing something in his memory. Knocking on a door he couldn't quite place. "I just need the gym," he said. 2 hours, maybe less. "I can't sleep and I need to work." Marcus should have said no. His supervisor had been clear all semester about unauthorized access. There had been incidents and the center was already on thin ground with the city contract. He knew all of this, but there was something in the way the man said "I need to work" that Marcus recognized. It was not entitlement. It was not the voice of someone accustomed to being told yes. It was the voice of someone who genuinely could not stop moving, and Marcus understood that more than most things in his life. He stepped back and held the door open. 2 hours. He said, "No lights on in the main corridor and you're gone before 4. The man nodded and walked past him, and Marcus followed him to the gymnasium door and unlocked it and turned on only the court lights, which threw a contained pool of gold over the hardwood and left the bleachers in darkness. The man took off his hoodie and his cap and hung them on the bleacher railing, and Marcus saw his face properly for the first time and stood very still for a moment. He had grown up watching this man. He had watched him from a folding chair in front of a small television in his mother's apartment. He had watched him in sports bars and on screens in shop windows and in the background of news programs. He had watched him become the thing people meant when they said the word greatness. Marcus said nothing. He walked back to his post and sat down, and for the next 2 hours and 11 minutes he listened to the sound of a basketball meeting hardwood in a dark gymnasium in Inglewood at 1 in the morning. The same sound over and over, patient and precise, like someone having a very private conversation with themselves about something that mattered. At 3:12 the man appeared in the doorway of Marcus's station. He had his hoodie back on and his cap pulled low, and he was breathing harder than when he arrived, but his face was calm, the way faces get when they have found what they needed. "Thank you," he said, and he handed Marcus a folded piece of paper and walked to the side door and pushed it open and was gone. Marcus unfolded the paper. It said simply, "Thank you for the floor," signed with initials. He recognized immediately. He sat holding it for a long time in the quiet building, listening to the vending machine hum and the faucet he could never fully shut off. He told no one. He folded the paper and put it in the same jacket pocket as his play notebook and went back to his rounds, and said nothing to the morning shift when they arrived at 6, and said nothing on the drive home, and said nothing when Brianna asked him at breakfast why he looked like he was thinking so hard about something. "Just tired, baby," he said, and poured her cereal and listened to her talk about Saturday's game. He lasted 8 days before the footage review caught it. His supervisor called him into the office on a Tuesday afternoon and turned a laptop screen toward him and pressed play. And Marcus watched himself open the side door and let a man in and lock up behind him, and Marcus did not make excuses. He sat in the chair across from his supervisor and said yes, that happened, and yes, he knew it was against protocol, and yes, he understood what that meant. He was walked out that afternoon. His key card deactivated his locker. Cleared into a plastic bag. A man who had spent 7 years learning every creak and shadow of a building told politely that the building no longer needed to know him. He drove home slowly, the plastic bag on the passenger seat, his play notebook still in his jacket pocket, and thought about Brianna and the Saturday league and the rent that was due in 11 days and the child support that had to be there by the 15th, and the way his daughter taped sneakers above her bed because she loved something the way he had once loved something before loving things started to feel like a luxury he couldn't budget for. He sat in his car outside his apartment building for a long time before going in. He did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark running the numbers the way he had run them so many times before, subtracting and dividing and finding the same answer each time, which was that the margin was thin and had just gotten thinner. He thought about the folded piece of paper in his jacket pocket and the sound of a basketball in a dark gym and the strange calm on a man's face when he had gotten what he needed, and Marcus thought, "I would do it again," which was either the most honest or the most foolish thought he had ever had, and he suspected it was both. Brianna found him at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning. She was still in her pajamas, her hair loose from its braid, and she poured herself a glass of water and looked at him. "Did something happen?" she asked. He told her the truth because she was 11 and had already learned that the truth has a way of arriving whether you introduce it or not, and it was better to be the one who opened the door. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. "You let him practice," she said. "I did," he said. She thought about this with the particular seriousness of children processing information they haven't decided how to feel about yet. "Did he say thank you?" she asked. "He did." Marcus said. She nodded slowly as if this settled something, and then she got up and got ready for school, and Marcus sat at the table and tried to figure out where to begin. He had applied to 2 jobs by noon and was on the phone with a third when his cell phone rang from a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, then answered because you answer when you don't know, and hope is a hard habit to break. The woman on the line introduced herself as a director with the Kobe Bryant Foundation. She was calm and professional, and she said she was calling on behalf of someone who had asked her to reach out to a Marcus Webb who had until recently worked overnight security at the Inglewood Recreation Center. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "That's me." She explained that her employer had become aware of what had happened and wanted to make it right. She asked if he would be available to meet that afternoon at an address in Playa Vista, and Marcus said yes before he had finished processing the sentence he told Brianna when she got home from school, and she looked at him with her mother's eyes, which always saw more than they let on, and said, "Dad," and he said, "I know," and she said, "Okay." And they drove together to Playa Vista because he wasn't leaving her home alone when something like this was happening, and because she was the reason for most of the decisions he made whether she knew it or not. The office was quiet and well lit, and the woman who had called met them at the door and brought them to a conference room with a table and chairs and a view of the parking structure. And after a few minutes a door opened and Kobe Bryant walked in wearing a plain white shirt and dark jeans, and he looked at Marcus and then down at Brianna and then back at Marcus, and he said, "You brought your daughter, she's why I do everything," Marcus said. Kobe sat down across from them and leaned forward with his elbows on the table and looked at Marcus directly, the way some people are able to look at you that makes you feel like the only thing in the room. "You lost your job," he said. "I did?" Marcus said. "Because of me, because of my choice." Marcus said, "There's a difference." Kobe looked at him for a long moment and something moved in his face. The foundation director placed a folder on the table and Kobe nodded toward it. "We've identified a security director position with a facility management company that works with 3 community sports centers in the Inglewood area." Kobe said, "The salary is 31% above what you were earning. Full benefits, the hours are days not nights. You'd be home for dinner." Marcus looked at the folder and did not open it immediately. "There's something else," Kobe said, and he looked at Brianna, who had been sitting perfectly still beside her father with her hands folded on the table in front of her, like someone who had been told this was an important meeting and had taken the instructions seriously. "We run a youth basketball development program," he said. "We have coaches and trainers and kids who are serious about the game, and we have a spot for a player who is serious about it too." He looked at Brianna. "If you want it." Brianna looked at her father. Marcus nodded once. She looked back at Kobe and said, "Yes, please." Which made the foundation director look down at her notepad, and Kobe looked briefly at the ceiling in the way people do when they are not going to let themselves feel something fully in front of other people. They talked for another hour about the job and the program and the logistics, and when they stood to leave, Kobe walked them to the door and shook Marcus's hand and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. "You said there's a difference," he said, "between my fault and your choice." "Yes," Marcus said. "I think about that a lot," Kobe said. "The difference between what you're handed and what you decide to do with it." He paused. "You decided to let me in that night. Not because you knew who I was, but because you recognized something. You said yes to it, even knowing what it might cost. And that's the thing I can't stop thinking about." Marcus looked at him. "I'd do it again," he said. "I know," Kobe said. "That's why we're here." They drove home through Inglewood, the same streets Marcus had driven 7 years of nights down, and Brianna sat in the passenger seat with the folder in her lap and looked out the window at the neighborhood coming past Dad. She said, "Yeah, that thing he said about decisions." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment, watching the streetlights. "I think you made a good one," she said. Marcus kept his eyes on the road and said nothing, because some things your daughter says to you in a car at dusk are not things you want to answer immediately, because you want to keep them exactly as they are for as long as possible. Within 3 months, Marcus had started the new position and Brianna had begun training with the foundation program twice a week after school. Within 6 months, her Saturday league coach told Marcus she was the best player he had coached in 4 years. Within a year, she had been invited to a regional development camp, and Marcus had driven her there in a car whose payments he could now make without doing the subtraction in his head. First, the recreation center on Century Boulevard got new lights that year. The street lights on the block that had been going out more often than they stayed on were repaired through a neighborhood infrastructure grant that the Kobe Bryant Foundation had quietly supported. Marcus heard about it from a friend and sat with that information for a while before deciding it was the kind of thing you file under the geometry of decisions. How one door opened in the dark can let in more light than anyone standing in that doorway could possibly see at the time. If this story stayed with you, drop your city and country in the comments below. And if you believe that doing the right thing always finds its way back, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more stories like this one waiting for you. Click the video on your screen right now and we'll see you there. Marcus had never been the kind of man who talked about himself. He had learned early that the world was not particularly interested in the interior life of a man doing a job that most people didn't think about until they needed it done, and so he had built a life around action, around showing up and doing the thing and letting the thing speak for itself. But something about that year changed him in a way he couldn't fully explain to himself. He started writing things down. Not in the play notebook, which was still in his jacket pocket and still full of plays for Brianna's Saturday League, but in a separate notebook, a plain one he bought at the drugstore on the corner. He wrote down things that happened and things he thought about, and occasionally things he wished he had said in moments when he had said nothing. Instead, he wrote about the night he opened the side door and what he had felt standing in the doorway of the gymnasium listening to the ball meet the floor over and over in the dark. He wrote about the way his supervisor had turned the laptop screen toward him and pressed play, and how he had felt watching himself on the footage. Not shame exactly, but something more complicated. Something that had to do with the difference between regret and accountability. He wrote about Brianna's face in the car on the way home from Playa Vista and the way she had said, "I think you made a good one," and how he had kept his eyes on the road because some things you need to protect from the moment they're in. He wrote about a conversation he had with one of the young coaches at the foundation program, a woman named Denise who had played college ball in Tennessee and who was patient with the kids in the particular way of people who have not forgotten what it felt like to be uncertain and learning. Denise had watched Brianna at practice one afternoon and afterward found Marcus by the bleachers and said, "Your daughter has something I don't say that easily," and Marcus had nodded and said, "I know," and Denise had looked at him and said, "You knew before anyone else did," and Marcus had thought about that for a long time afterward, about what it means to see something in someone before the world has confirmed it for you, about what kind of faith that requires and what it costs when the world takes its time. By the end of that first year, the foundation program had expanded to include a mentorship component that paired kids with professionals from the community, and Marcus had been asked to participate as a mentor, not because of anything he had achieved in the conventional sense, but because of something the program director said he demonstrated, which was the ability to make a decision under pressure. And then he leaned forward and looked at Devin's work and said, "I think you're close. Let's go through it again from the top." If this story stayed with you, drop your city and country in the comments below, and if you believe that doing the right thing always finds its way back, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more stories like this one waiting for you. Click the video on your screen right now and we'll see you there.